Always an honor to have a guest come back to Sexy Marriage Radio. And
Mhm.
so Dr. Emily Jamea is joining me again. Welcome back, girl. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. So great to connect with you again, too. I was so excited when I saw your email.
Well, it's fun. And I also have kind of been lurking around, kind of
Yeah,
watching what you've had going on. So,
awesome.
no, you've got a big project that at the time of recording rolls out right around the corner at the time of people listening. It's already out. So, Anatomy of Desire. Great title, but it's a
Thank
book
you.
that you've been working on for I know what it's like to put a book out there. So,
Yeah.
it's a lot, but I want to jump in to what this is all about, because I think what I've seen in it, because you were gracious to send me a copy,
hmm
is very, very straightforward and helpful, and like a just a good framework. And so you're talking about there's 5 aspects that we need to be working towards to help get flow state. Because when you were on in the past, I'm just catching the audience up. We
Sure.
talked about the idea of flow
hmm
and how as it pertains to our sexual and our sexual lives, our emotional lives, our erotic lives. And but now you're kind of even going deeper. So let's dive
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Let's chat about it. So, for people who don't know, who are listening, a flow state is a state of mind we get into when we are engaged in an activity in which we experience kind of a loss of space and time, total absorption, complete focus. And I realized that that's what my clients were longing to experience during sex. And I think
Mm-hmm.
in our extended version, we'll talk about the research in a bit more depth. But for now, what I noticed as I was talking to my research participants about how they get into a flow state during sex, it was these 5 themes that emerged, which is
Mm-hmm.
really the outline and foundation for the book. So we have sensuality, curiosity, adaptability, vulnerability, and attunement. And what I think is so great about each of these themes is that we're born with them.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is not a matter of looking outside oneself or becoming someone you're not, which is what I think a lot of people kind of worry about when reading a book about sex. It is more a matter of reaching down inside and tapping into that which already exists within us. It's more a matter of reconnecting with that which is already there as opposed to becoming someone that we're not, which is, I think, makes this really attainable for everybody.
Well, that's what I was just the word exactly of it, that makes it attainable, because we
Yeah,
realize, wait, this is part of our biology, our design, our makeup, and
exactly.
so there's a definite capability, but it also jumps out to me that there seems to be this element of get lost in, feel like I don't have one of these, or I don't even know how to capture an idea of one of these categories,
hmm
because I think of it as terms of I land in just one area. Because the one that jumps out to me, I mean, all these words I love.
Yeah.
Curiosity is one, and that seems so. In my experience with couples, and even in my own life at times, as it pertains to a sex life, that seems so foreign, because we
Mm.
kind of what gets the job done is a lot of the way we go about it after you're
Yeah,
in a long-term relationship, right?
totally.
And so you stop being curious about something, and then that couples right along with vulnerability of
hmm
how do I bring that part of me to this equation? I think we all have an idea, but it's also scary. So let's jump into sensuality. I just want to unpack them a little bit
Yeah, let's
each.
talk about each one. So, sensuality really describes the degree to which one can fully inhabit the body during a sexual experience and live and experience not just sex, but the world through the 5 senses.
Mm-hmm.
Again, bringing this back to something that is innate within all of us, this is what children do naturally. I mean,
Right.
toddlers are putting everything into their mouth, they're smelling, they're touching, they're tasting, and as we grow and mature, we're given messages like think with your head, or, it's all about thinking, thinking, thinking. And we start
Right.
to disconnect and with the body, and then add to that the fast paced world that we live in. What I noticed among my clients was this constant complaint of being unable to quiet the mind enough to
Right.
focus on a
Right.
sexual experience. And I called one of my early sex therapy supervisors just to find out if this was something she recalled from her experience working with clients, because she was much older than me and had retired, she mostly saw clients in the 90s. And she said, it wasn't so much of an issue the way you're describing, and I think what has happened is, thanks to smartphones and technology, we can multitask more than ever before. So we have split attention kind of
Right.
all day long. I mean,
Right.
I've got my phone right here, just knowing that this thing, of course, I have it on silence, but knowing that it could bing or ding oftentimes is enough to keep the mind a bit distracted from
Mm-hmm.
the task at hand. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have to ask ourselves, if we are running like a chicken with its head cut off all day long, how can we expect to go from that to the singular focus
Right.
of sex in an instant? And it's just not possible. So one of the things I encourage people to do, in the book, is really single task as much as possible, trim the fat where you can from your lives. And when we find it very hard to say no to anything, and I think we overload our
Right.
schedules. I mean, how many families actually sit down and enjoy an uninterrupted meal together anymore,
Right.
and then to expect to share your body and be present in your body at the end of the day, I just don't think is realistic. And so it starts with, the individual. And then I think in the relationship, just touching each other more.
Yeah.
It's like, if you want to have this mind blowing sensual experience and you haven't touched your partner in 2 weeks, the pathways aren't ignited quite
Well,
yet.
that even fits on the day-to-day
Yeah.
moments, in the sense of, okay, wait, we're going to rendezvous tonight, but we've done nothing to begin the process throughout the
Right.
day as far
Exactly.
as the senses are concerned, right? Because I
Right.
think that's that element of how is this interwoven. This is kind of a message we've had with Sexy Marriage Radio lately, of interweaving that aspect of our lives and
Mhm.
relationship throughout the day to make it to where there's a constant flow of that energy, if you
Right.
will, or
Right.
that and the way you're framing it here, the senses are in tune with that. The senses are aimed at some of that, expressing
Mhm.
it or receiving it, which helps
Yeah.
create a better possibility of the transition. Because I think married sex, to me, always requires a transition. We
Oh,
don't do
for
it by
sure.
accident. It has to be an intentional transition element.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And, thinking back to a comment one of my research participants said, which was like, we don't think of sex as having a beginning and middle and an end. We think of it as this constant energetic charge that we kind of dip in and out
Perfect.
of depending on, what's going on. And I love that, because I think so many people take sex and they put it in its own little box separate from everything else. And we can't do that.
Right. Right. Yeah, and so this is just the factor of bringing to mind, well, actually bringing to experience the full body with
Exactly.
the sight, smell, taste, touch, feel, all
Exactly.
of
It's
that.
it's like the body has a mind of its own. Mindfulness is such a buzzword, and I think that's a great first step, but this takes it a step further. So this isn't
Mhm.
just about mindfulness, this is about embodiment.
Mhm.
Embodiment researcher Mark Walsh said a line which I thought was so profound. He said, rather than being aware of the body, be aware as the body. And that minor change in preposition, I think, packs such a major punch. And it was something that came up again and again in my research. People would say things like, it felt like my body had a mind of its own, or my hand
Mhm.
just kind of went there because that's where it wanted to go. There wasn't a whole lot of like, this kind of disconnect that I think happens when we're trying, in
Mhm.
earnest to
Right.
stay present. It's more of an automatic, process that happens, and so that's I think an important theme to keep in mind.
That's good, which then leads us to the second one, which is one of my favorite, as far as a theme of life lately, which
Yes,
is the curiosity concept. And I think it
yes.
really became part of the culture even more thanks to Ted Lasso. But
Mm,
something that's been around for a long time, of just the curiosity component, but you've
yeah.
pivoted into this arena.
Yes, if sensuality is about the body, curiosity is about the mind. And what I tell people as they're reading this book is not to think of it so much as a roadmap. It's not like you have to hit each of these qualities all at the same time, but if life is chaotic and you need to slow down, tap into sensuality. If you feel like things are a bit monotonous and you're kind of bored, you're not feeling a sense of erotic aliveness anymore, then open the curiosity chapter. And that's where we
Right.
get into that because I think so many people are guilty of reducing sex down to a juxtaposition of body parts when we have this whole mind that's capable of attaching really interesting meaning and quality to the erotic experience so that it's more than just two bodies coming together.
Right.
I think a lot of couples in long term relationships are guilty of having like a set it and forget it mentality. It's like we do all this work to get to know our partners early on, and we kind of assume that that's the way they'll always be or the way our relationship is always going to be. But relationships, people are living, breathing organisms. We change and evolve, and we cannot stop asking deeper, questions rather than, did you have a good day at work, which is a close ended yes or no answer. It's, like asking the question, like, what was the most challenging thing about your work today? What are you hoping long term? Like, we just don't really get into those deeper level conversations, I think, as much. And we know that continuously getting to know our partners and ourselves, I think, adds a really interesting, unique element to the sexual experience. Trying new things is a piece of it, but
Mm,
it's so much more than that.
absolutely, because I think of it as far as, I mean, I'm with Pam, we're 31 years into this thing, and
Hmm.
she's not the same woman I married.
No.
And
Yeah.
if we weren't trying to continue to be curious, we wouldn't really stay up with each other in a lot
Right.
of ways.
Right.
We
Right.
would pigeonhole each other into, well, nope, in 2005 you reacted this way, so therefore it's set in
Yeah.
stone
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah. Yeah. We get locked into this like confirmation bias where we're constantly looking for evidence to confirm that our partner is the way we've always assumed
Right.
that they are, thought of them when, a lot of times we change, we grow, we evolve. And so I encourage people to, ask themselves what they're looking to learn about themselves or their partner in and through a sexual experience
Right.
rather than separate from. So that's an important part of it. And, as it relates to flow, one of my favorite flow elements that fits into curiosity is the challenge skills ratio. So if you imagine an XY axis where you have challenge on one side and skills on the other side, if the challenge of what you're doing is too far above your skill set, you'll feel anxious, scared,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
If the challenge of what you're doing is too far below your skill set, you'll feel bored, okay? We can get into a flow state when the challenge of what we're doing is just 4% greater than our skill set.
4%? Okay.
4%. That's it. So, I think when people hear trying new things, they're expecting they're going to have to do like 50 Shades of Grey type stuff. And hey, if that's your thing, more power to you. But a lot of times, it's the really subtle shifts, that
Right.
4% difference that helps you tighten your focus, puts you in the zone. Because if it's new, you have to pay attention to it. Can't be too
Right.
new and crazy or you'll feel
Right.
anxious, right? So, like one couple said, there was a time when they were having sex just in the missionary position, which they typically did. And her partner, rather than just supporting himself on his forearms over her, reached down and grabbed her hand with one of his hands and held the back of her head with the other hand. And that subtle shift just made her feel so connected and so in love and
Mhm.
focused because it was not only sweet, but it was just enough different from what they had
Right.
typically done that it kind of opened up this whole new emotion for her and
Right.
experience for her. So there's so much I think we can tap into when we kind of tap into our curious minds that can add a really interesting and unique element to the sexual experience.
Yeah, because I hear that as that's kind of touching on the elasticity of the brain
Yeah.
and the window of tolerance that we have. That if we can
Yes.
get to the upper end of that window,
Yeah.
that's when our brain kind of really does lighten up, which then will
Yeah.
lighten up our body because it's like, wait, there's new pathways going on here. There's something
Right.
we haven't quite experienced, but it's also not so far that I'm freaking out.
Exactly,
That's perfect.
precisely. Yeah, and there's this really interesting area of research called self-expansion theory where they took couples and had them try new things like shucking an oyster for the first time. Nothing too wild and crazy,
Hmm.
but they found that those couples were 36 times more likely to have sex that day. Not twice as likely, but like it was pretty much guaranteed that they
Right.
were going to have sex because trying something new together outside the
Yep.
relationship created a sense of novelty
Yeah.
inside the relationship because you're learning something new about yourself, you're relating to your partner in a new way, and that can be enough for a lot of
That's
people to
good.
keep things really exciting.
Which then leads us straight into adaptability, because I think
Yeah,
those two in some ways go hand in hand. Because if I'm going to be
they
curious,
do.
I'm gonna freak myself out, sort of. So how do I adjust with that?
And you
Right.
got to have the courage to make the change. Yes, exactly, which is what adaptability is all about. To our point, the sex we have in the early days is going to be different than it is when we're trying to conceive or when you have a new baby or your hip starts bothering you because you're becoming a little arthritic and you can't
Yep.
rely on the same old positions that you're used to. And so a lot of my research participants, despite having things like chronic health issues or recovering from cancer or you name it, no matter the emotional, relational, or sexual hurdle, found a way to navigate those so
Hmm.
that they were still able to experience an erotic connection. And I think this is where making sex a priority becomes really important.
Okay.
All of my research participants talked about, that they valued sex. They, saw and understood how important it was for them to have a meaningful relationship. And so, just as we prioritize anything that's important to us in life, we have to prioritize
Right.
sex. And, I think especially as it relates to flow state, most people have something in their life that puts them into a flow state, whether it's, playing an instrument or something artistic or a sport, running, even, there's tons of things that can put us into a flow state. But a common thread is like you carve out the time to do the fun
Right.
thing, you know? And for some reason, I think a lot of people think great sex should happen naturally and automatically, and they're not willing to kind of go through the stages required to get into the zone for great
Yeah.
sex. And so you have to carve out the time to do that.
Yeah, and that's the thing I love is about this point is the idea of we all have this, and usually in some aspect of our life, in some characteristic or category of our life, we are adaptable. We
Yeah.
will adjust, we'll shift, we'll, kind of pivot towards what's necessary in that moment. But
Hmm.
it's so interesting how we can become so routine and rigid when it comes to our sex lives, in the sense of, oh
Yes.
no, I can't do that. I can't
Right.
turn a light on. I can't grab
Yeah.
his hand or
Yeah.
touch myself or
Yeah.
open my eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because nope, just can't. Rather than wait, hold on. You
Yeah.
are capable. This is just a
Hmm.
different arena to use that ability.
Exactly. I think people are very guilty of having a very narrow, rigid script of what typically happens during any given encounter. And a lot of times in heterosexual couples, it's that sex begins with the male erection and ends with the male orgasm. And
Right.
there is just so much more to a great sexual experience than those two components. And so we've
Right.
got to broaden our horizons and mix things up from time to time. Because if we don't have that growth mindset, we're not going to be able to navigate hurdles, which inevitably are going to come.
Yeah. No, that's good. And so then that gets us into the vulnerability component, which this is
Mm.
one that almost seems, as I'm going through this, going, well, yeah, of course, everybody sees this sex is vulnerable, but let's dive into it, because that's not just exactly what you're saying here.
No, I think a lot of times people kind of tune each other out, instead of sex being this really intimate opportunity to connect emotionally. Again, it becomes this thing we're doing with our bodies. I have had several clients come through my office asking for ways to spice things up. And sometimes I'm like, have you ever tried just not breaking eye contact during sex? And they're like, well, I can't do that.
Why in the world would
Because
I
it
wanna be
feels
that
so
connected?
vulnerable, right? It's like too intense, and so yes, I think to use sex not just as an opportunity for physical pleasure, but this, deep emotional connection. I think that there's a lot of gender socialization that inhibits our experience to see sex as this really vulnerable act for men in particular. Both
Mhm.
men and women are socialized to think that men just want sex to get off. And I'm like, I have yet to have a guy in my office saying, well, I want to have more sex with my wife because I want to have more orgasms. It's not
Right.
about them, but they lack the vocabulary to even understand that for them they want to have more sex because they want to feel emotionally connected, that for
Right.
them sex is an opportunity to feel loved. And on the other side, a lot of women think that emotional connection apart from sex is all that should matter for them. They're not really taught that sex is an opportunity for love. They're taught you should maybe have love and have an emotional connection in order to have sex, but to see that as an opportunity to connect
Right.
emotionally, I think is something both men and women don't understand the full capacity
Yeah.
of how deep it can go and how profound an opportunity it can be. That's why we call it making love, right? That's why
Mhm.
it's, I don't like to think of that as just a euphemism. I mean, it really can be this amazing opportunity, but I think we just kind of shut down our hearts a little bit when it comes to the intimate act.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's so good because it's I mean, all of obviously, these all overlap, yet still have their own characteristic
Yeah.
with what you're talking about, because then you get into the idea of attunement,
Hmm.
which is, you know, in some ways kind of the culmination, but then again, not at all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, attunement can be thought of the, gestalt of the rest of these to an extent, but it's the analogy I give is like a pair of ballroom dancers who appear to move as one unit, and this does not happen without a lot of practice and experience together. When people want sex that feels effortless, but are unwilling to put in the time, I think it takes to sorry, there's like a something popping up in the background of my Zoom.
You're
Um,
good.
but aren't willing to put in the time to get in sync with one another. That's not going to happen. If you're only
Right.
having sex once a month, it's like think of it as an instrument, for instance. If you're not picking up and playing it, with semi regularity, you're going to have to spend time like retuning the instrument and getting into your groove, compared to like a pair of ballroom dancers who's dancing together, or a
Right.
sports team. They don't have time to stop and talk through each play on the field. Like they do so ahead of time, but then when it comes to the game, like they become very in sync with one another. And I
Right.
think that is, a feeling that a lot of couples want to have but don't know how to get.
Yeah, and that's just the idea, because that's what I think, that's where that word is so appropriate in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
because it fits the idea of I'm aware of me, but I'm aware of you.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
I
It's
can
maintaining
adjust
both.
and adapt and read and adjust and lead and follow. I mean, because that's
Mhm.
I think of the best encounters we have in marriage, particularly sexually, are where it's a follow the connection. And so there's
Mhm.
a give and take of the lead and the follow, right? It's not just
Exactly.
the one always taking the lead and the other just follows,
Mhm.
because even an element of following can be taking a good lead of
Right,
I
right.
stay
This is
engaged enough to go and then adjust and shift, and so I think
yeah.
all of that is so good.
Yeah, it's learning to pay attention to each other's nonverbal cues. I think there's such an emphasis on communication techniques, and that's again an important first step.
Mhm.
But if we want to have like really great sex, we got to get beyond the verbal
Right.
communication because you are
Right.
not going to want to have to stop and talk through every little move. It's going to break focus if we're
Right.
coming back to this. It's going to get you out of your body. And
Right.
in fact, humans across all close relationships, but especially couples in romantic relationships, have this amazing ability to co regulate the nervous system. You
Mhm.
ask two people to sit in front of each other, and eventually, like their heart rates, their breathing patterns will begin to sync up. And I think we can use that to our advantage in the bedroom to kind
Yeah.
of co-regulate arousal and pleasure, but only if we are really in tune or
Yeah.
attuned to one
Yeah.
another. So that's what that
No,
chapter is all about.
this is so good, Emily. So how can people find it, and then also grab the book for sure, but then also a little bit more about you?
Yeah, sure. So the book is available everywhere books are sold. Right now, I am offering tons of free bonuses on my website with proof of book purchase. So it doesn't matter where you buy it or what version of the book you get. You just go to emilyjamea.com, put in your receipt number, tell me where you got it, and that will unlock like $300 worth of free bonuses. And then if I have even more than that, so, people who buy bundles with maybe 3 books get access to even more bonuses. The bundles do have to be purchased all through the website, but there's tons there. So check it out. All my best material I'm like practically giving away right now. So it's a
Sweet.
good time to check
So,
it
so
out. And
good.
then, yeah, I'm across all the social media channels at Dr. Emily Jamea, and I host the Love and Libido podcast.
Well, perfect. Well, Emily, thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to, we'll pivot into the extended content with, let's talk about how this whole thing came to be, if you
Yeah,
will.
definitely. Thanks, Dr. Corey. Pleasure to be here.